A man in a charcoal suit stood blocking the check-in desk like a flesh-and-blood barricade, and he had just slammed it shut with his voice. "I'm asking you to leave the lobby. This establishment isn't for people like you." Not a Freudian slip. It was the language of an unwritten rule, released with the slow certainty of a bullet seeking its mark. Hard, deliberate, and cold. I stood there, my simple gray t-shirt hugging my frame like a silent coat of mail, my worn-in Converse still planted firmly, and my coiled hair a crown of stories that had yet to find their peace. I looked at him not with rage, but in my soul there was a quiet tear, like the sound of paper being ripped beneath a careful finger. Because he didn't know that in precisely 9 minutes he would be the one walking out of the building he considered his own. He didn't know this place was mine. And he was hardly the first to make that assumption. So before you get too comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe to the Unwritten Truths channel. And before we dive deeper, let us know what time you're watching and where you're tuning in from. Leave a comment below. We always love seeing where this community is listening from. And don't forget to like and subscribe if you believe stories like this matter, because trust me, they absolutely do. Now turn off the lights, switch on the fan so you can enjoy the story, and let's begin tonight's journey. I pushed the glass door of the Prescott Grand Hotel with the back of my hand, the hinges issuing a faint groan like a soft complaint. The cool marble floor beneath my sneakers felt like the unspoken language of entitlement, a surface not built for people like me. No greeting, no eye contact, just 4 stark white walls, 2 decorative pots of white orchids, and 3 people behind the counter, as frigid as marble sculptures that had never felt a moment of warmth. Robert Vance. The hotel director, his hair lacquered into place, stood like a statue sculpted from his own self-importance. Next to him was Lauren Kessler, her powdered complexion suggesting she'd just returned from a clandestine seminar on institutional bias. And beside her was Kevin O'Malley, his eyes narrowed and arms folded across his chest, as if braced to fend off anyone who didn't fit the picture. "I have a reservation. The Penthouse," I said. "The name is Ava Sterling." A simple name, but their system should know it's anything but. Robert lowered his head slowly, as if decoding a text in an alien script. "The presidential suite. Are you certain you have the right hotel?" His voice was cold, dry, and sharp, like the crackle of dead leaves. I didn't answer. I simply slid my Amex Centurion card and my driver's license across the polished counter, steady and unhurried. He picked up the card with 2 fingers, as if handling a soiled piece of trash, looked squinted, then let out a smirk. Looks suspicious." Lauren said nothing, simply pressing the silent security alarm with a perfectly manicured crimson-painted nail. "Possible unidentified individual attempting to access the presidential suite system. Potential fraud," her voice echoed through their internal comms like a fire drill bell. I didn't argue, not a single word. "I'm here to check in." I repeated my voice, still unwavering. Kevin let out a short, cutting laugh. "Same story, different day. Fancy card, fake ID, unfamiliar face, hoping we won't look too closely." At the edge of the lobby, a phone screen glowed like a digital candle. A young Asian American woman named Mina Park raised her phone to eye-level whispering to her friend. "I'm recording this. The world needs to see it." Beside her was Darius Jordan, a young black man with wisdom in his eyes. He was already live. "The Prescott Grand San Francisco. This is happening right now, and it's not right." I started to feel the stares. Some looked away. Some started filming. A few heads turned with the slow deliberation of a vinyl record rewinding. And Clara Fuentes, the young receptionist at the far end of the desk, looked at me. Not like the others. Her eyes seemed to be searching for a memory, a fragment of a name, a flicker of recognition. But Robert shot her a look that could extinguish a flame, silently communicating she doesn't belong here. I took out my own phone and tapped the screen gently. No text sent, just an instruction. 2 words, activate now. On the other end, Brianna Holt answered in half a second, needing no further explanation. All systems are green. Robert kept flipping my card between his fingers, as if waiting for it to break. Fraud. We see this all the time. Bogus booking, phony black card. Then they disappear when the bank gets on the line. Not tonight. He passed the card to Kevin. Secure it. Kevin opened the safe behind the desk, each metallic click sounding like another lock closing on a part of me. He dropped my card inside like it was a piece of contraband and slammed the safe shut. The thud didn't echo, but it felt like it sealed away an entire history of people like me being treated like trespassers in a world we helped build. Mina whispered, her voice choked with disbelief. They're confiscating her card. Darius moved a step closer, his fury plain on his face. That's illegal seizure. No hotel policy gives them that right. I didn't lunge. I didn't raise my voice. I just said loud enough for them all to hear, "You will regret that." The line wasn't a threat. It was a period at the end of the first chapter and an exclamation point for every rule they had just broken. Because you know what follows the quietest warning, the truth. And the truth doesn't need to raise its voice. You know this wasn't the first time I'd been barred from a hotel lobby. At 24, I'd gotten off a red-eye flight from Boston so exhausted my bones ached. I was wearing a hoodie, yoga pants, beat-up sneakers, and carrying a printout of my reservation from an email. No designer luggage, no executive assistant, no corporate ID. The front desk attendant took one look at me and said flatly, "You don't look like you're staying in our premier suite." Then he claimed a system error and told me to come back in the morning when his manager would be in. I slept in my rental car that night, my head pressed against the steering wheel, my body contorted in a nameless humiliation. The shame felt like a thick wool blanket slowly suffocating me. The very next morning, in a sterile coffee shop under a gray sky, I started sketching out the initial business plan for what would become the Zenith Hospitality Group, a chain of hotels for everyone who had ever been made to feel like they didn't belong. Clara Fuentes, the youngest member of the Prescott Grand's front desk team, stood silent while I was being degraded. But in her eyes, I saw a flicker, like a spark from an ember that hadn't quite died. She didn't snicker like Kevin, or glare like Lauren, or posture like Robert. She just stood there, as if waiting for permission to finally exhale. In her, I saw a younger version of myself from a time when I believed silence was a shield. But silence doesn't protect you forever. It just postpones the blaze. And when the blaze comes, it doesn't care if you're ready. Robert kept on his tirade. "You are wasting the time of our actual guests." He spoke with the unearned confidence of a man who was used to giving orders without question. But he hadn't noticed that the lobby had gone utterly still, not with deference, but with rapt attention. They were watching, recording, bearing witness. I turned to look at Darius and Mina. One phone was held high. Another was already broadcasting live. Small lenses, but not insignificant. The light from a single camera can be enough to illuminate everything a system tries to keep buried. "I'm asking you to leave now," Lauren interjected. Her voice had the cadence of a well-rehearsed script, as if she'd ushered many others out the door before me. "If you refuse, we will be forced to call the police." I held her gaze. "Are you absolutely sure you want to do that?" Lauren nodded, her chin lifted in a defiant pose. Robert folded his arms, tilting his head. Go on, make a scene. It'll only end badly for you. I didn't even smile. That is the last time you will speak to me in that tone. Clara took a half step away from the desk, her voice quiet but clear as it landed on the silent air. Her name is in the system. I saw it. The booking is valid. At that moment, my footstep echoed slightly as I moved forward. My shoes, a pair of worn-in Converse, met the marble floor with a quiet thud, a reminder that I was still here. I was still standing. Robert turned to Clara, his eyes full of menace. One more word out of you and you're fired. I raised my phone to my ear. But this time it wasn't a bluff. It was an activation. Brianna, I said slowly, each word dropping like a stone into a still pond. Mark this exact moment. Timestamp the video footage. I want every single second documented. Darius lifted his phone higher, panning to the steel cabinet where my Amex Centurion card was locked away like a murder weapon. It clearly says Ava Sterling, Tier 1 VIP. She's legit. Robert sneered. Phony cards are a dime a dozen, especially for people like them. I cut in. Say it. Go ahead. But he stopped short. Not from any sense of decency, but because he had just caught a glimpse of what men like him fear most, the collective gaze. People were starting to take a side. I took one more step forward, the sound of my shoe on the marble like a ticking clock. You just made the biggest mistake of your career. Robert tried to laugh, but it came out looking like a pained grimace. You really think so? I didn't nod. I know so. Kevin stepped out from behind the desk, dangling the safe key like a war prize. This card is now property of the hotel, he announced, as if he were the law itself. Until the bank verifies its authenticity, you're not getting it back. The click of the safe echoed like a final punctuation. But what he didn't understand was that it marked the end of their authority. You are wasting everyone's time, Robert barked. Get out now or we will physically remove you. Lauren, emboldened by her male colleague, stepped forward, her hand reaching for my arm. You have been warned. Now leave. The moment her fingertip made contact with my sleeve, the air went still. A silent fracture ran through the hearts of everyone watching. Mina shouted, She just put her hands on a guest. Darius, his voice tight. We're live streaming. Almost 400 people are watching this happen. The hotel lobby was frozen. Clara stepped out from behind the desk, a walking, talking verdict. You are not permitted to touch the guests, she stated, her voice now solid and unwavering. Lauren spun around, her eyes flashing. One more word, and you are done here. Clara looked at me, then at Robert. I'm not going to be complicit anymore. Robert roared, She's a fraud. People like her are always... I cut him off again. Go ahead, say it. But he didn't, because just then an elderly woman across the room murmured, I can't believe I am hearing this in a luxury hotel. A man nearby pulled out his earbuds, speaking into his phone. You getting this? Darius nodded, every single breath. I still hadn't moved a muscle. I spoke into my phone. Brianna, escalate to corporate. Begin full documentation protocol. Her reply was instant. Marked. Should I patch in Judith? I paused for a beat, looked around the lobby at the faces that were beginning to shift from observation to solidarity. Then I said, Give me one more minute. Kevin shouted, You think that little piece of plastic gives you power? Go back to where you came from. This time Clara wasn't just standing near me. She was a small, unbreachable wall between me and the storm. I have worked here for 3 years. Every single time someone who looks like her walks in here alone, dressed simply, they get this treatment. And every time someone objects, you call it policy. But it's not policy. It's you. Robert looked at Clara, as if she were a mirage in the desert. "I'm calling security. I'll have both of you escorted out." Lauren jumped back in. She failed to present a valid form of payment. That's a breach. But no one was buying it anymore. In that lobby, power had begun to transfer, not by force, but by witness. I turned to Kevin. "Give me my card back," he smirked. "Or what?" I looked him dead in the eyes. "Or you'll be expunged from the Zenith system. No job, no severance, no record you ever worked here." Lauren scoffed. "And who do you think you are to make threats like that?" Clara answered for me. "She doesn't have to think. She is." Darius spoke into his phone. "I think this is the moment everything changes." He screamed in my face. No longer a poised hotel employee, Kevin O'Malley now looked like a man frantically defending an imaginary line he'd drawn in the sand. "You're a fake. You think having a Centurion card makes you a somebody?" His voice was brittle and harsh, like the squeal of grinding gears. An aggression born not from a single moment of misjudgment, but from years of unchecked prejudice. His anger wasn't because he thought I was a criminal. It was because I dared to stand my ground in a space where, according to his internal rulebook, I was supposed to shrink. Lauren whipped around her face, ashen, her eyes blazing with the fury of someone watching her comfortable world go up in flames. "You will be sued for criminal impersonation. I am reporting this to the board myself." She hadn't realized she had become the poster child for a system that had committed the same offense time and time again, using someone's skin as their admission ticket, their attire as their bona fides, and their borrowed power as a final verdict. Robert Vance, who had carried himself like a bronze monument to authority, finally felt his foundation crack. "Call security!" he bellowed, slamming his palm on the counter in a last-ditch effort. "Get her out of here, and you, Clara, you're fired!" But his hand didn't land with authority. It only made the sad, hollow sound of a man who was used to being obeyed, now shouting into a void. I didn't flinch. Clara didn't either. She stepped forward fully by my side, now her gaze fixed on Robert. "Keep yelling," she said, her voice low and steady, as if every word had been tempered by 1,000 unspoken grievances. "Who do you think you are? Just a man who was given the keys and thought it meant you owned the castle." I tilted my head toward Clara, giving a slight nod, not as a boss, but in profound gratitude. In that moment, I didn't see a receptionist. I saw a young woman choosing courage, knowing full well it could cost her her livelihood. Someone once told me that true change doesn't start with grand pronouncements, but with a single person standing up when everyone else is looking down. Lauren shrieked, her voice now laced with panic. "You are destroying the integrity of this establishment," I replied. "If an establishment's integrity can be destroyed by one person speaking the truth, maybe it never had any integrity to begin with." Just then, Brianna's voice came through my phone, sharp and clear. "Ava, confirm if you want me to patch you through to Judith Shaw. Everything is logged. We have camera footage, live stream records, audio." I answered calmly, "Hold." Then I moved closer to the desk, my gaze unwavering. I looked directly at Robert, then Kevin, then Lauren. "You took my card, you called me a fraud, and you tried to remove me from a place I own. And you did it all as if it were just another Tuesday." Darius slowly panned his phone around the lobby. In the midst of the chaos, a strange quiet was descending. A quiet born not of apathy, but of the dawning realization that they had all just witnessed something irreversible. Clara placed her hands on the counter, her voice firm. "I have filed 3 formal discrimination complaints in the last 6 months. 2 involved black women who were traveling solo. All 3 times, Mr. Vance signed off on the dismissals, citing misunderstandings, and never escalated them to corporate." Lauren spun around. "That's a lie." Clara met her eyes. Today I'm done with the lies. And a woman in the lobby with silver hair and an elegant coat stepped forward from the waiting area. I was here last week, and that woman, she pointed at Lauren, told me there was an unexpected issue with my room right before I watched her hand my reserved key to the white gentleman who was behind me in line. People began to look at one another. A single voice was no longer a single voice. It was a chorus. I lifted my hand just high enough to raise my phone to my ear. "Judith," I said, my voice level like a perfectly tuned instrument. "Initiate emergency protocol. I need a temporary system-wide lockout for Robert Vance, Lauren Kessler, and Kevin O'Malley. Revoke all login credentials and freeze all internal permissions." A beat of silence. Then Judith's voice, as sharp as a surgeon's scalpel, came through. "In progress. ETA 18 seconds. Robert's face went white. He stared at his own access card as if it were a useless piece of plastic. "System error." Lauren staggered back, her mouth agape, her eyes wide like a child who had been pushed off the jungle gym for the very first time. Kevin stammered, "No, no way." I didn't smile, I didn't lecture, I didn't have to. Because the truth, when it finally arrives, doesn't need to yell to bring the guilty to their knees. It just needs to be seen. I turned toward Clara. She was still standing there. And for the first time, I saw her smile. Not a smile of triumph, but the relieved smile of someone who had just witnessed justice happen not on a screen, but in her own life. Darius, his voice thick with emotion, spoke into his phone. "We're live, and you are watching the exact moment the CEO, the woman they called a fraud, took back her own hotel inch by painful inch. And the thing is, I didn't yell, I didn't fight, I just stood still. Because in the end, I knew that when you are right, and you are proven right in front of the world, the outrage of the guilty becomes its own confession." Robert Vance started to unravel like a man trapped in a burning building, stripped of every shred of his managerial composure. He was no longer behind the safety of the desk. He stalked into the center of the lobby, his finger pointed directly at me, his voice tearing through the charged air. "This is a breach of protocol. You don't have this authority. This is the Prescott Grand, not some plaything you can just manipulate." His words were the dying cries of a self-appointed king trying to remind the crowd of a power they no longer recognized. He scanned the room for allies. No one met his gaze. Lauren didn't speak. She just backed away, her lips trembling, clutching a phone that now read, "Access denied." Kevin had already slumped against the wall, his eyes darting like a trapped animal's sweat plastering his collar to his neck. I said nothing. While they descended into the maelstrom of their own making, my voice was no longer required to prove a point. The witnesses had seen everything, and the raw fear of those who were once in charge became the most damning evidence of the guilt they never thought they'd have to answer for. Robert waved his arms frantically, as if he could swat the truth away. "She's putting on a performance. This is all an act. There is no Ava Sterling. It's a con." His voice shattered no longer the composed command of a director, but the frantic, panicked shots of a man who had lost control. What he couldn't comprehend was that every furious word he uttered was just stripping him more bare in front of dozens of onlookers. Each denial was a confirmation that he had governed through bigotry and was utterly lost now that his primary tool had been taken away. A tall man in a crisp blue shirt stood up from his chair in the waiting area. "You're screaming at the CEO of the very hotel that's in the process of firing you." A woman in sharp glasses stepped forward calmly, holding up her phone, her voice as steady as a final judgment. "I've recorded this entire exchange. You have just publicly defamed the legal owner of this establishment." An elderly lady wearing a beautiful silk headscarf moved closer, aiming her phone directly at Robert's face, her stare as unyielding as polished stone. Clara Fuentes stood beside me watching the chaos unfold, but I saw her clench her fist slightly. Not from fear, but from solidarity. She asked me quietly, as if to make sure I was still present. "You okay?" I nodded. Nothing more was needed. The look in her eyes said it all. It wasn't the look of an employee to a boss. It was the look of one woman watching another stand her ground and understanding on a soul-deep level that this outcome was inevitable. Lauren finally began to crumble completely. Her voice broke a pathetic whisper of static. I was just following procedure. I didn't know. I thought I was protecting our brand." Her eyes locked on mine, desperately searching for a pardon I was not there to grant. I was there to survive. And she, along with the others, was the reason I had to learn how to survive in this world since I was a teenager. You were not trained to decide who gets to belong here, but you made that choice. No one put a gun to your head when you hit that alarm. I spoke not loudly, but with the clarity of a diamond etching glass. The problem isn't what you did. It's that you did it so easily, believing no one would ever hold you accountable. Darius was no longer commentating. He just panned his camera, slowly capturing each face, Robert's pale as death. Lauren's head bowed in defeat. Kevin's looking as though his spine had been removed. Then he settled on me. The camera held still, no zoom, no special effects. Because in that moment, reality was more cinematic than any staged scene. Brianna Holt's voice came through my earpiece. "Ava system update is complete. All of their access privileges are permanently terminated. The live stream has just crossed 18,000 concurrent viewers." I replied, "No public statement. Let the footage speak for itself." A silent wave more powerful than any speech was rippling outward. I hadn't set out to start a revolution. I just had to stand my ground. I walked toward the counter. Each footstep on the marble echoed like the final toll of a bell, signaling the end of a lesson in consequences. As I reached it, I no longer saw a reception desk, but a public bench where judgment had been passed. I placed my palm on its cold, smooth surface skin on stone, a final reminder of who had been pushed away and who had been allowed to lean. This place wasn't always this cold, I thought. It became cold because men like Robert made it that way, one small act of exclusion at a time. I looked around. The circle of witnesses was drawing closer, not to trap, but to stand in witness. A 12-year-old girl in a bright jacket, eyes wide, held her mother's hand. Her gaze reminded me of all the years I had swallowed my words. And now I was speaking for all the ones who still couldn't. I asked to no one in particular, but with a voice that carried to the high, coffered ceiling. If I had arrived today in a designer suit, if I'd had an assistant trailing behind me, if I'd pulled up in a chauffeured town car, would you still have called me a fraud? No one answered. But their collective silence was the loudest answer of all. Robert, still frozen, managed one last pathetic defense. "You're destroying your own brand. You could have handled this discreetly. What now? Everyone's seen it." I looked him dead in the eye. My voice was quiet, but it cut sharper than any insult. I did handle it discreetly, for 10 years. I wrote polite emails. I filed formal complaints. But you didn't listen when I spoke softly. So now you'll hear me when I speak loudly. The first clap came from my right. A second one followed. Then a third. Not a rapid, chaotic applause. Each one was a deliberate, affirming sound. An older man in a tailored suit rose from his chair. "I've never seen anything like this. and I truly hope it's not the last time I do." Zoe stood beside me and let out a long, slow breath. She said nothing, but in that single exhale, I heard everything I'd waited years for someone to tell me. "You are no longer alone." Robert Vance tore the employee ID from his neck as if trying to prove he still possessed some form of control. But when the security chip emitted a final lonely beep and flashed red, his expression fell like a stone into dark water. "No, no way. I'm the one who runs this hotel," he shouted, his face a blotchy red, his hands shaking. But he was only left with noise, and noise carries no authority. "You manipulated us. You set this up. You're a nobody who knows how to work a crowd." Lauren Kessler stood just behind him, as pale and crumpled as a discarded receipt, whispering, as if lost in a bad dream, This has gone too far." Too far, I thought. No, this is only the beginning. I stood there without lifting a finger, without uttering a word, simply being present. And my presence was the most damning accusation of all, because for years people like them had made the very presence of people like me an object of suspicion. Kevin O'Malley, the man who had eyed me like a cat burglar from the moment I entered, could barely meet my gaze now. He looked at me as if I had personally dismantled the very walls he used to feel secure. He finally mumbled his words, almost a plea. "I was just following the rules. I didn't know." I glanced at him, my eyes as cold and unforgiving as unpolished steel. Not knowing is not an excuse. You knew enough to fall into formation the second I walked in. You knew enough to smirk when I told you my name. And you knew exactly what you were doing when you locked my property in that safe, as if I weren't a human being. The crowd was no longer an audience. It had become an impromptu jury. A middle-aged woman raised her voice. "Lauren is the one who denied my reservation last month because my last name didn't sound local. Now it all makes sense." Another man, a lawyer by the look of his briefcase, added, "Kevin told me to wait a minute because my room wasn't ready, then proceeded to check in 3 white guests who were behind me. He left me standing there for 40 minutes. I turned to them, not to offer thanks, but in silent acknowledgement. I knew they weren't just standing up for me. They were standing up for themselves after years of enduring countless similar slights. Their truth made me no hero. I was just the catalyst that finally made the dam break. Clara Fuentes stood beside me like an oak in a storm. She no longer needed to be liked. She only needed to be heard. And now the entire lobby was listening. A young black boy behind his mother asked, "Mom, who is she?" The mother leaned down, smiled, and whispered, "She's the woman teaching the whole hotel a lesson." And I heard it. I heard every word. That sentence echoed in my chest like a bell heralding a new era, one in which I would no longer have to ask permission to simply exist. Robert, his face now the color of raw meat, screamed one last time. "You'll pay for this. I'll sue. I have a team of lawyers." His voice cracked against the marble like a stray bullet, loud, but leaving no mark. I took a step toward the counter. "You have a team of lawyers?" I asked. "Good. I have a global hospitality group. I have dozens of live witnesses. And I have the truth. You're welcome to sue, but please understand I didn't come here to win a case. I came here to reclaim this." Clara finished my thought without missing a beat. "And it ends right now." The people around us nodded, not out of persuasion, but because the truth had finally been called by its name. No more inappropriate conduct, no more misunderstandings, just blatant systemic bigotry enabled by the cowardice of people like Lauren, the arrogance of people like Robert, and the casual cruelty of people like Kevin. Darius, who had been streaming the whole time, spoke softly into his camera. "You are watching the first trial without a judge, because here, Justice is its own witness. I leaned forward and tapped my phone. Brianna, execute the termination order. Send a network-wide alert. Permanently revoke access for all 3 individuals from all Zenith Hospitality properties. 1 second later, Brianna's voice came back crisp as a new dollar bill. Confirmed. Employee ID codes have been permanently deactivated. Access denied. Flagged as do not rehire across the entire network. A soft beep came from Lauren's pocketed badge. Her eyes lost their focus like a sailor who had just lost sight of the shore. Robert made one last desperate stand. You don't get it. We built this place with our blood and sweat. I looked him straight in the eye. No. You maintained it with prejudice and privilege. I built my company with scars and memories, and today I take it back with dignity. A woman in the crowd began to weep. Not loudly, just a quiet, steady stream of tears as she said, I was once asked to leave this very lobby because my skin was darker than my friends. Her story didn't silence the room. It gave it a memory. Because everyone there had heard stories just like it. The difference was, today, no one was willing to hear another. Clara placed her hand flat on the counter, her eyes on fire, not with rage, but with purpose. You could fire me this very second, she said to me. But if I have a choice, I want to stay. I want to stay and help build this place back up the right way. I looked at her, my eyes dry, but my heart full. I'm not firing you. I need you to run this place, because I need someone with a spine. Darius turned to Mina, who was still holding her camera steady. You're getting this right. Mina nodded, her eyes glued to the screen. Every single second. Then they both said almost in unison, this isn't drama. This is justice. At that moment, I turned to the crowd. I didn't raise my hand. I only asked one question. How many of you have ever been made to feel like you didn't belong in a place where you had every right to be? So many hands went up. Not to speak, but to silently say we understand. They had stood where I was standing, and now they were standing with me. The glass doors of the Prescott Grand slid open with a polite chime as the corporate response team arrived, but there was nothing for them to do. Because in the center of the lobby, the 3 people who had once lorded over this space, Robert Vance, Lauren Kessler, and Kevin O'Malley, were imploding before everyone's eyes. There was no desk to hide behind, no name tag to grant them authority, no system left to obey their commands. Just 3 shadows shrinking under the harsh, unwavering light of public exposure. Robert staggered, yanking at his useless ID badge as if that simple act could rewind time, but the system only responded with a dead beep and a cold red light. No, this is a mistake. I run this place, he cried, his voice trying to assert a reality that no longer existed. Lauren clutched her handbag to her chest like a life raft. Eyes wide with panic, her voice a desperate stammer. We were just trying to protect the brand. It was company policy. And Kevin, he was leaning against the counter, his face ashen. His hands balled into fists, desperately avoiding eye contact as if becoming invisible might make it all go away. But no, everyone was watching. And for the first time, no one was looking away. I stepped forward, each footstep sounding like a truth breaking through a rotted floorboard. Policy. I repeated my voice, not loud, but as sharp as a shard of glass. So, what exactly is this policy deciding who is worthy enough to be welcomed and who isn't? Pressing a security alarm the moment a black woman dares to walk in alone, confiscating a guest's property like a piece of evidence, trying to eject them from a space they paid to occupy. I paused, my gaze moving over the three of them. That isn't a policy. That's a system of humiliation, and you were its willing operators. Robert clenched his fists, his throat constricting around a sound somewhere between a protest and a gasp. You have no right. You're just a name on a letterhead in some office. You've never stood here day in and day out keeping this place secure. I looked directly at him, my gaze holding nothing back. You're right. I haven't stood here every day, but I know what it's like to be dismissed because of the color of my skin. I know what it's like to be seen as a threat for simply existing. And I know exactly how many people you have done this to. People who didn't have the power to fight back. The murmuring in the lobby grew. An older woman, her hands trembling, but her eyes clear, called out, "Lauren is the one who told me to please be patient when I tried to check in last month." While I stood there, she checked in 3 white men who walked in after me. A young man in a hoodie and backpack added, "Kevin here told me I didn't look like penthouse material. I remember that. And now seeing him stand there, he looks exactly like he belongs nowhere." Each new sentence was another nail in their collective coffin. No more hiding. No more excuses. Clara Fuentes, her voice no longer a whisper, but a declaration, stepped forward to stand beside me. I once heard Robert tell a trainee to be wary of the off-brand guests, especially those who don't look like they have money. I heard Lauren whisper to a colleague that a particular young woman looked more like she belonged at a nail salon than in the executive lounge. And I watched Kevin take a picture of a guest's ID, a brown-skinned man, and laugh about it with a valet. She turned to me. I used to be terrified, afraid of losing my job if I said anything. But if telling the truth today costs me this job, then it was a job I never should have wanted. I nodded, feeling a tightness in my chest finally release. I was no longer an island. The solitary weight of being shamed was being lifted by a chorus of voices joining mine. And that was something people like Robert, Lauren, and Kevin could never have the truth on their side. Robert, grasping at his last straw, snarled, "You will regret turning an internal issue into a public spectacle. I will sue you. I will drag you down with me." He held up his phone like a final desperate weapon, but the screen just read, "Account locked." He tried to place a call, but the signal was dead, as if the very air around him had conspired to cut him off. A pathetic, desperate man screaming for a drink in a desert he had helped create. I spoke without raising my voice. "You can try to sue, but understand something. I didn't come here to shame anyone. I came here to cleanse this place. And if that makes you feel ashamed, then maybe that's something you need to examine." Dylan trembled his lips, forming a silent, worthless apology. But I didn't look back. Because I didn't need apologies. I needed accountability. And justice has no time for what-ifs. Darius, his voice low and steady, spoke into his camera. "We are witnessing something extraordinary. A system of discrimination being taken apart in real time in front of guests, employees, and thousands of people watching live. No one can unsee this." I turned to Clara. "Do you accept the position to run this hotel?" Clara looked at me, her eyes lit with the fire of a new beginning. "I accept, but nothing will remain as it was. Everything will be rebuilt starting with respect, not suspicion." I nodded. "That's exactly what I was hoping you'd say." I turned back to the crowd. "How many of you have been dismissed, ignored, made to feel like you had to justify your own existence?" Hands started to rise. One hand, then another. Then a forest of them. A mother lifted her young daughter's hand high in the air. An elderly man raised both of his. A young Asian woman nodded silently in agreement. No one needed to speak anymore. We were all looking at each other, and in those eyes no one stood alone. Clara turned to me. Ava, you didn't just take back a hotel today. You just opened a door that hundreds of people thought was permanently locked to them. I didn't reply. I just took a step back, looked around the now transformed lobby, and understood that justice doesn't require a bullhorn. It only requires presence. And today, I was present. When Judith Shaw, the head of Zenith's corporate compliance, called, her voice wasn't its usual placid tone. It was sharp, urgent, and vibrating with a controlled rage. Ava, I've just finished a preliminary review of the last 6 months of guest complaint logs from the Prescott Grand. Some were completely buried. Some of the official responses were fabricated. And worse, she paused, letting the weight land. I found an email chain between Robert Vance and Harrison Croft, explicit written instructions. Filter prospective high-value guests according to brand standards. A list of names was rejected for being off-brand. And one message where Croft himself wrote, "That kind of demographic doesn't align with our brand identity." Ava, he was talking about you. I said nothing. The silence in my office was so profound, I could hear the faint buzz of the overhead lights. A chill traced its way down my spine, not of fear, but of a deep, sorrowful pain. I remembered once seeing a complaint from an elderly woman who said a hotel employee had treated her with open contempt because she was wearing a headscarf. I had simply forwarded it with a short note, "Please handle this internally." I had once stayed silent within the very system I was now dismantling. I knew what it felt like to hope someone somewhere would see you. And now I understood with blinding clarity that my silence, too, had been a form of complicity. I hung up the phone. Robert was still there, a ghost haunting the lobby. He seemed smaller now, but his eyes were still dark with a stubborn refusal to accept his fate. "You think you know everything," he spat. "You have no idea about the pressure we're under. You're just a corporate figurehead behind a desk. You've never had to manage day-to-day operations. You're too idealistic. You'll destroy this entire brand." His voice carried the stench of quiet backroom deals, anonymous memos, and best practice groups that were nothing more than coded instructions for prejudice. An Asian woman in a crisp white blouse stepped out from the crowd. "She's not destroying the brand. She is wiping the table clean after your hands have been dirtying it for years." A young black man in a baseball cap followed her lead. "I stood at that exact counter a month ago. Kevin looked at me like I was wasting his oxygen. Today he's standing over there looking exactly how I felt that day, like he doesn't belong." Lauren shrieked, her voice no longer tearful, just brittle with panic. "I was just doing what I was told. I didn't create the policies. You can't put this all on me." She was trembling, but not with remorse. It was the terror of a person losing her place in the hierarchy. I didn't need to respond. Clara stepped forward, her voice level, but each word landing like a hammer blow. "You didn't write the policies, but you enforced them. No one forced you to smirk when Ava handed you her card. No one ordered you to stand there like a gatekeeper judging who was worthy. You did that because you were comfortable. You did it because you assumed no one would ever talk back." I spoke into my phone. "Judith, I want a full-scale internal audit. I want you to flag every property in our network with a history of similar complaints, especially those that were dismissed as misunderstandings. I want the immediate suspension of every hiring manager appointed under Harrison Croft's tenure." Judith's reply was instantaneous. "Already drafted. Just waiting for your official sign-off." I looked up. Robert stammered, "You don't understand. Dozens of people feel the same way I do. You can't fight the whole culture." I stepped forward, my voice low but sharp as honed steel. I don't have to fight the whole thing at once. I just have to start with one. And today, that one is you." Darius, still filming, tilted his phone slightly and whispered to his audience. 5:28 p.m. A reckoning without a courtroom. A verdict without a jury. I turned to Clara. "I'm giving you full operational authority to restore the Prescott Grand. Close all new bookings for the next 3 days. I want every application from anyone who was part of Robert's inner circle to be cancelled." Clara nodded. But before accepting, she looked me straight in the eye and said, "I used to think that staying quiet meant staying safe. But today I learned that silence doesn't save you. It just lets someone else suffocate a little more slowly." Just then, an old professor leaning on a cane stepped forward, his voice frail but firm. "Ava, you don't need my praise, but you should know that you taught a masterclass today, and we will tell this story. So everyone who was ever told it was just a misunderstanding will finally know it was a deliberate blow." I inclined my head toward him, not in gratitude but in deep respect for his witness. Lauren clutched the edge of the desk like a drowning woman clinging to a rock in a flash flood. "I don't deserve to be cast out like this," she whimpered. But no one responded. Her punishment wasn't our anger. It was our silence, and Kevin. He finally turned and walked away without being told. Each heavy footstep he took, Darius followed with his lens. Mina read a comment aloud from the live stream. "I was denied a room at the Zenith in Chicago once. Is this connected?" Another person wrote, "They asked for my ID 3 times even after I'd already checked in. Now I finally understand why." I looked at them. All of them. The ones who never spoke but had stayed. The ones who had once been forced out and had now come back to stand in a circle of solidarity. And I knew today we hadn't just brought down a manager. We had taken a wrench to a machine. And if anything from this day deserved to be remembered, it wasn't my name. It was the moment that everyone who had ever been made to feel less than looked the system in the eye and said, "I am still here." Robert Vance, who had once patrolled this hotel like it was his private kingdom, was now just a solitary man in a lobby that had used his gaze to judge his words to reject and his system to exclude anyone who didn't conform. He stumbled toward the exit. No one moved to stop him. No one made way for him. Lauren Kessler followed, her eyes red-rimmed but dry, clutching her purse to her chest as a last piece of social armor. Kevin O'Malley was the last to go. No final excuses, no pleading glances. He simply turned his back. Shoulders hunched, his footsteps seeming to drag the weight of the world with him. No one spoke to them as they left. But it was that very silence that stripped them of the final privilege they cherished most, the right to be ignored. The glass doors slid shut behind them with a sterile beep, closing the cover on a book no one wanted to read again. I stood in the center of the lobby, not as a conqueror, but as someone reopening a book of my own memory, a page where I was once the one being dismissed for the crime of standing in a lobby with this skin and a name they deemed out of place. Clara stood by my side. Her eyes were moist, but her posture was resolute. I asked, "Are you ready?" She nodded. "Where do we begin?" "We begin with everyone who was never allowed to start," I answered. I walked toward the front desk, the very scales of their prejudice, the place where I had been insulted, doubted, and silenced. I turned on the system-wide microphone. My voice echoed into a space that was once filled with quiet rejection. "My name is Ava Sterling, and as of this moment, the Zenith hospitality system will no longer be an instrument of judgment. It will become an instrument of trust. For the next 3 days, this hotel will be closed for a complete operational review. Every employee who was dismissed or disciplined for speaking out will be contacted. Every guest complaint that was ignored will be reopened. And a new guest advisory board will be formed composed of the very people who were once turned away to help us rebuild a culture of service. Because true hospitality does not begin with a smile. It begins with respect. I switched off the microphone. There was no cheering, just applause, measured, slow, and deeply sincere. A woman with rich brown skin stepped forward, tears glistening in her eyes. "Do you have any idea what you've just done?" she asked. "You've given people like me a ticket back into a world that was designed to erase us." Darius kept his camera rolling, but now he was silent. Mina stood beside him, her hands trembling as she held her phone, her lips pressed together. She was crying. Not a dramatic sob, but the quiet, cleansing tears that told me this moment wasn't just about justice. It was about healing. I didn't see myself as a victor, but I knew I had done what had to be done. I stood there in the very lobby that had tried to eject me. It was now still like a lake after a great storm, like a wayward child that knows it has done wrong and is now waiting humbly to be taught again. I looked up at the ceiling where the grand chandelier still glowed. But for the first time, its brilliant light didn't make me feel small. I closed my eyes and saw myself at 16 in a simple sundress, standing outside the Astor Hotel in Denver, clutching my school books waiting for my parents. The woman who turned me away didn't see me as a person. She saw me as a problem that didn't warrant a solution. I had bowed my head then. I had asked myself, what did I do wrong? And today, I could finally answer that girl. You did nothing wrong. You just had to live long enough to rewrite your own ending. By now, Clara had begun coordinating with the new team, locking down all former access and launching the system-wide audit. She stood among her staff and said without a microphone, "From now on, this hotel will no longer log how many times security was called for a suspicious guest. It will log how many times a guest was greeted by their rightful name." A middle-aged woman approached the counter, her hand resting gently on its surface, her voice soft, as if afraid to break the spell. "Thank you," she said, "for not just walking away like so many of us have had to." I took her hand in mine, a knot tightening in my throat, not from anger, but because for once I felt completely understood without having to explain a thing. I turned back and looked at my hotel. This lobby no longer smelled of expensive, exclusionary perfume. It smelled of fresh air where anyone could breathe. Ava Sterling, once branded an imposter, no longer had anything to prove. Because she hadn't just reclaimed her power. She had held the door open so others could walk through. No one had to produce a key. No one was asked for their ID 3 times. No one was sized up from head to toe before they were believed. If this video moved, you don't forget to like and subscribe and turn on notifications so you won't miss our next story. What time are you watching and where are you watching from? Leave us a comment below. Because every time you share, one more person like Ava gets seen. And if you have ever been doubted just for being you, please remember this: you are not alone. This story isn't over. It has only just begun. A few weeks later, the Prescott Grand reopened its doors. But it was no longer the kind of place that made you feel small upon entering. The polished gold nameplates had been replaced by hand-carved wooden ones with Braille and sign language engravings. The VIP recognition program no longer filtered guests by how much they spent, but by a new metric: how they treated the housekeeping staff, the valets, and even the people who arrived with no luggage at all. The suite I had been denied entry to now hangs a small, elegant plaque by the door. It reads, "This space once turned away someone who belonged. From this day forward, it will turn away no one." Clara Fuentes, now the hotel's executive director, no longer wears a name tag. As she puts it, "If I need a badge to earn respect, then our culture still has work to do." She greets every single team member each morning by their name, asking a simple question: "What do you need today to make this place better than it was yesterday?" I, Ava Sterling, did not return to the hotel on its grand reopening day. I stood on the sidewalk across the street, just watching through the large glass windows. I saw an elderly woman being personally walked to the elevator by Clara. I saw a young, brown-skinned boy sitting in the plush lounge reading a comic book, a lounge that used to be for premium guests only. No one asked him to leave. No one asked who he was. And I smiled, not because I had won, but because I had stood my ground. I had spoken. I had held open a door. And the world, however slowly, was learning to see again. Sleep well. Thank you for listening. And if you saw a piece of yourself in this story, please remember we still have each other.